This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Yo, this is Sharmane from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
Hi, and welcome to Militantly Mixed, a podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Sharmane, aka Mixed Girl Maine, and I am re-recording my intro for this week's episode because I have been sick the last week or so, and when I recorded my intro on Saturday night, kind of in the wee hours of the night, I sounded awful, and I was just listening back to it, getting ready to upload this episode for y'all, and it sounded way too pathetic, so no, we're not gonna do that. My voice is better today. I'm still sick, but it sounds better today, so re-recording. A couple things I want to chat about before we get into this episode is last week on Tuesday, before I got sick, I got a chance to go meet a former guest of Militantly Mixed. I've been talking about it the last couple of weeks. I got to see Allison Hart, the author of Mostly White, the novel about the 4 generations of mixed race women. She did a reading out in Pasadena, California, at the bookstore of Romans with a V. So I went out there and I got to hear her do her reading, which was awesome. She read from 3 sections of the book. And what I really like about going to a reading or even audiobooking where the author is the person who reads the book, what I like about doing that is that you get the cadence and the intent that the author had in the characters when they read them and everything like that. So now, at the time I had gone to that event, I had only been about 3 chapters into the book, and now that I've heard her read it, my continual reading of it is now in the cadence and the voices that she provided at that night of the read, which I'm really into. That may not be your thing. That's my thing. So I really like that I had that chance to hear her read. And then afterwards, myself, 2 other mixed race ladies, a friend of Allison Hart, the 5 of us all went to a cafe at the end of the reading, and we just chat into like a couple hours in, and most of us were strangers to each other. I mean, my only interaction with Allison had been over Skype before this, and she did bring a friend, but everybody else was, I believe, strangers to each other. They certainly were to me, but you wouldn't have known it. We were just 5 mixed race women talking about, or 4 mixed race women and 1 monoracial woman talking about, womanhood and sisterhood and mixedness and of colorness and things like that. And it was an awesome night. It was just really nice to get together with other people who are sort of on board with the same thing that is going on in your life. Our lives are kind of shaped by our mixedness, and it's nice to sit down and talk to other people who have that same sort of background, even if we come from different heritages. And it was just awesome. It makes me want to have like a monthly mixed race ladies day or something like that, luncheon or something like that, because it was really gratifying and uplifting to have something like that. It was amazing. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because it was like a happy mixed person moment. And next thing, what else is the other thing I want to talk about? I don't remember. Not important. That was the important thing, is that I really enjoyed that night and getting a chance to hear Allison Hart read, and I hope that I get to see her again in person next time she comes down to Southern California, or maybe I'll make my way up to the Bay Area, whichever. It was a great night. So if you haven't already, please check out Allison's book, Mostly White. It is a novel. Try to get it from a local bookstore, preferably owned by a person of color, and just kind of spread that love in that direction. That would be awesome. I mean, it is available on Amazon and all those kinds of things, but sometimes the slightly less convenient thing of going to a local store or ordering that way or whatever takes a little bit longer, or you got to go out of your way to get it, but you are putting money directly into your community. And if on top of that, it's also a person of color who owns the store, that's one more level of getting it into your community. So yeah. Okay, from there, let's move on to this week's episode. This week's episode, I have got to control myself, y'all. I do not know why I can't. I'm just so enjoying of these interviews that it is really hard for me to get to a place where I'm like, okay, we got to stop so that we can make a full episode. This week's guest and I talked for about 2 hours and 47 minutes. I am not going to suggest you to 2 hours and 47 minutes worth of interview for this episode, but what I am going to do is chunk out about an hour of it And then there are other parts in the later part of the interview that I do want to share. So not next week, but in a few weeks, we'll come back and revisit this guest so that you can kind of get her full picture, because we kind of talked about so many different things across Mixedness that it would be nice to bring that back. And I already have a couple other episodes planned for the next couple of weeks. So that's what we're going to do. This week's guest, her name is Rebbekah Vega-Romero. And I apologize for my Spanish accent because, I don't have a very good one. She will pronounce her name correctly when you actually hear her speak. She is of Jewish and Cuban descent, and she's an actress in New York, a working actress. And between the first time we spoke and the time we actually recorded was about a month and a half or so, maybe even longer. But we had been in contact at least over Instagram and then email and then Skype and stuff like that for a few months before we actually got to speak for the recording. She's awesome. I like talking to her as a regular ass person, as a guest, as whatever. And she is someone that I would describe as an ethnic chameleon. And I'm not going to take ownership of the term, because that is actually the name of her musical theater cabaret group that she has with a bunch of other mixed race people she co-created. But when she said that name to me, the name of her group, I was like, oh shit, that's you. Because she has this unique thing, and I talk about it in the episode, of depending on which direction her face is facing towards you, she either looks kind of whitish, or she looks kind of Latinish, or she looks kind of black. Like, she is an ethnic chameleon. Her face changes race depending on what position it is at when you're looking at it. It's amazing. You're not going to see that, obviously, because this is an audio podcast, but I got to see it when we Skyped, and I thought it was pretty cool about her. So I'm not going to get too far into it. Like I said, we're only going to cut about an hour of this interview into this episode, and then we'll revisit her in a few weeks so we can hear the rest of her interview. But just let's keep this thing going. I am just so in love with mixedness, more than I have ever been in my life. I thought I was the most mixed I could be, but this show just makes me mixed AF. And I love y'all for participating, whether you're jumping on the show or hitting us up on social media or sending me emails or just listening. That's awesome too, because we need to hear our stories reflected back at us. So as I do every week, if you want to come on the show or you want to be considered the show, I have slowed down my interviews for the time being, because I do have several months worth of interview or episodes to put out. But if you got something going on that you really want to promote right away or something like that, feel free to still hit me up and we'll make that work out. But yeah, come on the show, start talking to me. Let's get some mixed race representation for you out there. You can email me at Sharmane@militantlymixed.com. That's S as in Sam, HARM as in Mary, AN as in Nancy, E at militantlymixed.com, or follow us on our social media at Militantly Mixed on Twitter, on Instagram, and you can search us on Facebook under that as well. And then don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on whichever podcasting platform you listen to, because the more you subscribe and rate and review us, all three of those, the more eyes get to see us, will be suggested more often, and then more people can hear us. So if you needed it to hear mixed race stories, you can guarantee someone else did. So the more you push it, share it with your friends, whatever, the further it'll get out. Over the last couple weeks, I've been checking our map. We've gotten into Colombia, Trinidad and Tobago. Where else have we gotten into that's new? There was a few other places. I think we got into, did we get into Cuba? I don't think we got into Cuba, but we definitely are in the Dominican Republic and Jamaica, and we're in Mexico now, and we're in Chile now. So people are picking us up across the world, and it is awesome. Keep sharing with your friends. Share on social media. It only takes 2 seconds, and it helps us keep going and growing, just like sponsorship does. As you know, this is a fan-sponsored podcast, so if you want to help support the show and help keep us going, you can go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for a monthly subscription with reward levels, or you can drop us a quick one-time only donation at paypal.me/militantlymixed. All the money goes back into the show. Right now we're covering mostly our hosting fees and a little bit of equipment upgrades and things like that, so every little bit counts. I don't take any of it personally, not yet, not till I can start making some real money doing this, but for now we're just putting everything back in the show to help keeping us going. So I think that's good. I think that's everything. I definitely don't sound as sick as my pathetic first intro was, and yeah, let's get going. Without further ado, here is Rebbekah. I'm excited to come back today because I haven't spoken to my guest in almost a month, and she's been doing big things on the stage since the last time we talked. Please help me welcome Rebbekah Vega-Romero to the show, and then you go ahead and say your name correctly.
Oh, thank you, Sharmane. No, that's cool. I grew up hearing it pronounced that way a lot. I grew up in New York, but I say Rebbekah Vega-Romero. And I'm really excited to be talking to you today. I'm a little nervous, actually.
But... You don't have to be nervous. So the funny thing is that people don't realize I'm recording them the entire time from the time the call starts, but it's the second that you realize you're being recorded that everything changes.
Oh, yeah. So different from, like, you'd think I wouldn't get nervous because I like to get up in front of people and sing and act and stuff, but it's really different when you're speaking as yourself.
Right. It's the same for me because I don't think of myself as very shy, and I'm really performance-y, so if I can capture an audience of any kind, I love it, but every time I'm about to start the show, I get weird. I'm like, hi. All right, let's get started. All right, so why don't you tell everybody, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your ethnic background, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. So I'm Rebbekah. I'm a native New Yorker. I think that's like a really big part of who I am. I grew up in the city, and I'm mixed race. My mom is a white Jewish lady from the suburbs of Philly, and my father is a Black man from Havana, from Cuba. So they had completely different life experiences, and on top of being from two different races and two different countries, they also grew up in two different religions. My dad grew up in Catholic school, and he was an altar boy. So those are the two big differences. And of course, being from Cuba, his family is like very, very mixed. But they would never talk about it that way. That's like not the language that I've ever heard used from that side of the family. They're just Cuban, and that's it. But if you like investigate it all, you'll find on that side, I have, people who have been descended from slaves, Taino, which is the Native American tribe there, and Spanish, and then also Dutch.
Oh, I didn't realize the Dutch great grandmother to Cuba either.
I don't know how big of a surge that was, but there's like my dad's mother was a redhead from the Netherlands, and then my mom's mom has red hair, so that's how I ended up genetic improbability.
Actually, I had a guest recently who also they're Puerto Rican and they're mixed with Taino. So, and that's actually something that's come up a lot with all of our Afro-Latinas, and one Afro-Latino that I've had on the show so far is that it's even just like in your case, because you do have parents that are two different races. For them, it was learning to identify their mixed heritage because they were just Puerto Rican or just Dominican or, I listened to the most recent one that aired. Palmyra?
I thought that was fascinating to me because it's just very different from my experience of it.
Yeah, it's a part that I really like investigating for the show just because I think, some of our cultures or some of our ethnic groups are mixed heritage, but once they persist through time after, they become their own thing. And so it's hard. And then the cultures develop around it. So it is kind of hard to identify whether or not you still claim mixed or feel that you can claim mixed. But when all the people in your family are different colors, that's really where the race aspect comes in. So, and it happens way more for the Latinx world, I think, than almost every other group.
Yeah.
But there's different aspects of it in almost every other ethnic group too, so it's interesting. So I like to explore it. But let's get into you. So you are an actress, a working actress in New York, and you just recently were on stage. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I just did a play at the Metropolitan Playhouse. They do forgotten American plays, or plays that maybe didn't get their fair shake the first time out, things like that. So this play was written in the 1920s. It's by Philip Barry, who wrote the movie The Philadelphia Story, which is like, if anyone, do you know it?
I've seen it.
Of course. Okay, great. I was like, I have a feeling. So for those of you listening who don't know, it's a sort of bittersweet rom-com starring Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. This is that author's first play. So it's very similar themes of like comedy, romance, a little like the tragedy of life, but it's all very, very much white people problems.
Starring mixed race Rebbekah Vega-Romero.
Yeah. And it was my first role back under that name. So 3 or 4 years ago, 4 years ago, right around the time that I got married, I decided to change my performing name and like straighten my hair and try to be more like lean into the white presenting side, which is something that has chased my career. I started acting when I was a kid, and the first agent I had insisted that I go by the name Rebecca Irene, which is my middle name, because she said no one would know what to do with a little redheaded girl whose name was Vega-Romero.
Right.
And my parents went along with it because it was the 90s, and that was a totally acceptable thing to say. But looking back on it as an adult, that was like so damaging to my sense of identity.
Right.
So I did get some of what I wanted out of changing my name. But as I started realizing that there were some other things in my life that needed to change, like I just got divorced, I realized I missed being myself, if that makes sense. And that anyone who didn't want to work with my complicated self, I didn't want to work with, you know? Like, if the idea that I'm super pale, but I'm Afro-Latina, if that would be a problem in casting me, then that's not the kind of art I want to make.
I think that's an idea that has been kind of becoming more and more present in the news with actresses nowadays, in particular mixed race actresses. So, and of course, I don't have her name off the top of my head, but the actress that plays Quake on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is mixed Asian and white, and she has a white sounding name, but that's because she has a white parent, I believe is her father. And so they're saying, oh, you should change your name to look more Asian because that's what you look more like. And she's like, well, no. I'm going to own my whole identity. And it just so happens that I happen to be a mixed Asian. And I guess one of the actresses from Crazy Rich Asians had that come up to Olivia Munn has had that be an issue for her as well. So it's like, it's this common thing of like either cast based off of what the world is actually like, you know, with all of the different intersectional people that are out there in the world, or don't even entertain the thought of putting me in your thing if you're going to erase my identity.
Right. I think it's so important, especially because lately I've been writing a lot and looking into like historical stuff and finding that it's not like a new thing. Being mixed race is not a new thing. Right. It's just, especially in America, people like me who had one black parent and one white parent and then came out looking very pale. I mean, I think my features, I look like a white female version of my father very strongly. Like there's some of my mom there. I think I have her chin, but my eyes and my nose, and my body shape is also very Latina. Like I have a big butt and it took me a long time to embrace that because that's not what I grew up with. Anyway, what I was saying is like people who look like me who could maybe quote unquote pass as white were often like cut off from their families and forced to live like in hiding. Yeah.
And it could be either for an opportunity or just straight up survival or whatever. It's interesting that you describe yourself as sort of like a white or pale looking version of your dad, because I have that same issue. When I tan and when my hair is curly, I'm the spinning image of my father. My eye shape is similar to my mother's, but everything else about my face is my father's, including my hairline. If I actually pull back my bangs, I have his hairline. But I'm pale, you know, I'm the yellow-brown version of my black father. And I think a lot of us come out looking like our fathers because of genetics. It's like helping to make them bond with us so they don't abandon our mothers. But it's interesting when we are mixed race and we come out paler looking than, say, our darker-skinned parents is because we're walking down the world as like legit black people. We look like black people. We're just so pale that white people can't figure it out, usually. But do you, when we talked before, so I'll just break away before I say this thought. When you actually see Rebbekah, her race changes depending on what angle her face is facing you at the time. It's actually...
That's legit.
It's pretty remarkable because in the entire time we spoke, we were on video chat the first time, and you do look white-ish, but there's some, for me, a mixed person, I'm looking at you and I see something else going on, but I can see how a monoracial person might just go, yeah, that's a white girl, whatever. Mm-hmm. So you do kind of do that a little bit face on, but when you turn your face, you do become Latina like that, like boom. And then you actually did one thing where you just looked behind you and it was just the back of your head. And then you turn back around and I was like, oh my gosh, you changed again. It like you have a whole thing. Your race changes depending on what angle your face is facing the person who's looking at you. And it's pretty remarkable. But because now that I've said that, when we were talking before about that, trying to find your identity, when trying to match your face or your presentation to your identity and being forced by your own parents basically to erase yourself as a child for your performance, like all of that bottled up inside of you as an adult, when it breaks open, you must have just had a period of time that you were just like, what am I? Like, what am I allowed to be? I'm pale, I'm black, I'm Jewish, I'm Latin, like, what am I? So let's get into a little bit how that is for you.
That's like that time, I think, is now that like sort of breaking down of that's sort of what I've been going through the last couple years, is figuring out what am I allowed to claim? What is empowering for me to claim? Right. What is, I what's like going to do good in the world too? Because I don't want to be like, I would never, especially because I have siblings who are different shades than I am. I can look at my siblings and be like, oh, they've walked very different paths than I have. Right. My brother, his mom is black too, so he looks like a black man. And my little sister has got more of an olivey skin tone and she looks stereotypically Latina. And it's just the sort of comments that I've encountered and the way that I've walked through the world has been very different. But I think that sort of chameleon thing of like, I look different depending on how you look at me and what context in which you look at me. That's sort of something I'm trying to embrace. And that's why that was a big reason that I pushed for us to take the name Ethnic Chameleons. I have a cabaret group. We've done a couple concerts here in the city and I want to do more. And we're all mixed race performers.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this with you because we got into it a little bit about a month or so ago. And I think because you were about to start your play, you weren't able to do something for the Chameleons. But let's get into the origin of that group and all of the reasons behind trying to push mixed race representation out in front of audiences.
Yeah, so really, we came together because of an acting coach. Her name's Jen Waldman. She runs Jen Waldman Studio here in New York City. And if you do musical theater, you should check her out. She's amazing. But I was kind of going through this. I had gotten back from a national tour and I was feeling very disempowered by the industry. I was still using my other name and I had just started like experimenting with wearing my hair natural again. And I was like, feel like I don't fit in. And if I embrace who I really am, which will, I think, allow me to make better art, I'm afraid I won't get to work.
Right.
I don't know how to change that perception in the industry. Like I can't cast myself in something. And at the same time, in a different class that she was teaching, my friend Kelsey, who I didn't know at the time, was also saying the same thing. So Jen put us together. She was like, you guys need to meet. Yeah. You're having a similar issue. So we met up and then I found a couple of other people and we were just like, let's put on a show. Let's talk about this and also like do what we do. Yeah. Let's like use musical theater to talk about the issues of being someone who doesn't fit in the box in an industry that's all about boxing you in.
Right.
And labeling you. Like literally something that happens is typecasting, where they'll be like, oh, what's your type? Are you the girl next door? Are you the villain? And we have all of these, because it's America, we have all of these like racialized ideas about who gets to play what role.
Right.
So.
And isn't that a weird thing about casting, like, or about acting in general? Like we really want to typecast people. And yet the whole thing about acting is being someone that you yourself are not. So
yes.
Why do we typecast?
That's really true. And I'm finding that as I'm trying to move into more of an actor creator role, like I'm writing, I have a short film that I'm trying to get produced that is explicitly deals with being mixed race, but it's a comedy. What I'm finding is I'm really hungry to see families that look like mine and to see people who look like me. And I can't be the only one because I think it's starting to come up more and more. There's two. Do you like Christmas movies, like cheesy, gross,
I'll watch anything.
Holiday movies.
Seriously, because I went to film school, I always say that I'm professionally trained to watch movies, whether they're trash or not, and I can sit through the stupidest, awful movie and be like, oh, the use of non-diegetic music or, or something, some bullshit like that, all the way up to, masterpieces or whatever. So I can sit there and I can sit through some campy stuff and have no problems whatsoever.
Okay, because two movies that I watched this week made me incredibly happy. Neither of them are very good, but both of them have a mixed race girl as the lead.
Oh.
And you get to see her family, and it's never commented on. It's never like,
that's awesome.
That's never the point of the story. So it's The Holiday Calendar was one, which is like a new Netflix film.
I have seen that pop up on my thing, but I haven't even ventured to click on it.
Yeah, it's worth watching just for that because it just makes me so happy. And I can't remember what the other one was, but I'll look it up and I'll let you know. And it's stuff like that, which I think it's not the newest thing, but it's more and more prevalent.
Yeah, when I was a kid, and I'm quite a bit older than you, so for me, it was a legit desert of mixed race people. Like if there was, say, a light-skinned black person in a family, it was never about the fact that they had mixed blood in any way, shape, or form. It was just like the way white people casted black people. It's like, oh, they're all black, so they must all be the same, even if some are clearly biracial and some aren't, or, things like that. And or if they did ever happen to address it, it was always a black father with a white mother. And it was always some kind of problem that white bitch is in the family. Or that black man is ruining our daughter, so it was never just, and this is what I talk about all the time, like, we just want movies where we're just regular. Like, it's almost better that they never acknowledge the fact that people are mixed and they're just in the family, and you're just meant to, for people who can't deal with it, you're just meant to deal with the fact that they have different color family and be like, oh, but it's possible for them to all be related, because that's our experience. None of our parents look the same. They're always different colors, and we just want to see somebody that looks like us so that we don't think we're the weirdest family on the planet.
Yeah, exactly that. It's wanting to see it normalized, but then also what I'd love to see is it's normalized, but it doesn't mean it's never talked about. Like, because when it's never, like, you don't mention it at all, then it's like you're saying you're colorblind.
Yeah.
That's
true too. Colorblindness is a problem. Actually, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with addressing someone who brought up that she doesn't see color on Facebook today.
Oh, God.
And the weird part is she's mixed race also, but she was responding to something I posted about blackness, and I don't want to alienate the relationship, the Facebook relationship, but at the same time, I want to give her access to the information about how racist colorblindness is.
Yeah. Well, I think that last phrase might be the key there, is saying, like, I just want to give you access to some information. Make of it what you will.
Yeah. It's one of those topics that make me so angry that I know that it's hard to not come off like, listen. For me, the topic is so sensitive that I struggle to not come off as like really aggressive about it, where I'm just like, your colorblindness erases my uniqueness or my mixedness or whatever, or any person of color gets erased because of this thing. And it's not acknowledging the difficulties that we have as people of color. Just because you say that you're going to treat us with humanity doesn't mean that you not acknowledging that we are different is a positive. And it's just one of those things of like, when I see it, I get so angry. So like, I need to do the 10 count to like come down and be like,
yeah.
Okay, let's try to talk about this in a more productive way, because my initial reaction is almost always like, why does this concept persist? It's such an annoying idea. And I am not a big fan of any of those racist things that people don't think are racist, that are meant from a good place, like it's coming from a good place, but they don't realize why it's bad. And to try to explain that to somebody who is trying to be thoughtful It's such a struggle. It's such a struggle.
Something you said that like has really struck a chord with me that it makes me a little nervous to talk about on the record, but I'm going to say it. Yeah, no. Something you've mentioned several times is like that growing up, you wanted to be darker.
Yeah.
And that was like, I can't tell you, I'm going to start crying. Wow.
Like, it's one of those topics that's really tough.
I just was so sure my whole life that like, if I was darker, my dad would love me more.
Yeah.
And I hate talking about it because I don't want to sound like the tragic mulatta. Like, I don't like that stereotype, but man, that, at least for me, it's so true. It's like that I just felt like I didn't belong in that. Specifically because I was so light, there was like something wrong with me.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that feeling. And it is a tough one, especially because you don't always come out of feeling that way unscathed. Like even now, though I am comfortable in my mixed skin and I know who I am. I'm fine with my like, sort of hierarchical view of my race. Even at 41, I'm occasionally struggling with the idea that I'm not dark enough so that it's such an awkward thing. I have what I think of as similar to survivor's remorse where it comes to my light skin or like my light skin privilege. It's so weird that you brought this up too, because I just had a conversation with someone about this earlier, where it's not that I want all of the negative stuff that comes along with being darker skinned, but I also don't want to not get that just because the roll of the dice made me yellow, you know? And so even though I have a face that Black people usually identify right away and I'm part of the club usually pretty quickly, there's still moments in which I'm an outsider. There's still aspects of Blackness in which I am an outsider. And this is going to sound really stupid, but this is an exact feeling I've had several times. If we're in a dark space and I'm not darker, but it's a Blackness related thing, like let's say it's a comedy club and it's a Black show or something like that, and I'm laughing along to the things that if a white person was laughing along, they'd get the shit kicked out of them.
Oh my God.
You know, I would be worried because that is my experience. I am Black. I grew up in a Black household, in a Black neighborhood. My culture is Black. Even though I'm mixed race, I'm primarily culturally Black. So if I'm in, let's say, a comedy club it's a Black comedy club and they're talking about a topic that is very specific to Blackness or even more specific to hood Blackness, which is my upbringing, and I'm busting up alongside all the Black people and I'm not at an angle in which they can see my face right away and they're looking at my yellowness wondering what the fuck am I laughing about? Those are moments too in which I have almost it's almost like wanting to wear the wristband or the t-shirt and be like, no, I'm mixed and I grew up Black and it's okay. I'm from Long Beach. I can, this was my experience too, and you don't want to have to go through a whole explanation, and that kind of stuff can be painful and it can be scary. And there's also moments, too, in which if I were darker or presented a little bit more Black, then a lot more about me would make sense to people. Because I'm always explaining, why is my name Sharmane Latrice Franklin? Why is it spelled with an S, and not a C? Why doesn't it have an I in it? Why do I have a capital letter, a lowercase letter, and a capital letter inside one word? Things like that. There's so many things about me, even my personality, that would make a lot more sense to people if I just was a little bit darker. And at my teenage through my young adulthood, 20, 25, say this stuff was painful, and I would cry about not being Black enough and then feel stupid that I'm crying, but can't help that I'm in pain. I'm really legitimately in pain over not being darker skinned. Now, as a 40-year-old, I still have the same exact feelings, but I have tried to put them in a framework or Rebekah, I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still trying to understand, like, what is this thing that I need to do to make myself feel more comfortable. And even now, as a host of a mixed race show, not even one mixed race show, two mixed race shows, or at least shows that have the topic of mixedness involved, to sit here and be like, I'm not comfortable that I'm not dark enough. It feels stupid. I feel like I should have my shit together a little bit more, but I can't help it. It's an insecurity that I still have. In the reverse of you, though, if I were darker skinned, I would have had less of my father's attention because my black father was very self-loathing. Even though he moved us to the hood and everything like that, he was still very self-loathing where it came to his blackness. And so that would have been a different thing, I think, there. Not that I necessarily feel like I had much of his love anyway, because he's very abusive, but the disregarding, because I embraced the blackness so much, I was disregarded quite a bit by my father, whereas my brother embraced the whiteness and they had a closer relationship, albeit my dad was still abusive to him as well. So, it's a whole thing, and I still deal with it, and it's not fixed. It's not, all I can say is that I haven't gone so far as to do skin darkeners, even though I found out that they exist. That's like,
do you mean like
melanin,
melanin,
melanin enhancers?
Really?
Yeah. There's medications that people can take. So it's actually, the weird thing about this medication is it's designed for people that are so pale that they can't function in the sun.
Ooh.
So for folks like,
well, I'm not that pale.
Like Scandinavian folks, if they lived in
but people
darker
like
skin,
a skin disorder.
Yeah, it basically stimulates your melanin, and so you do come out darker. And then it could be supplement to like a tans. Obviously, like it's not like I don't lay out if I go to the beach or whatever, but it's not that I haven't been so obsessive about the dark skin that I go through lengths to make myself darker regularly. But it's just one of those things. It's like, because it has to be natural, and I'm just mad that I didn't end up darker. It's a point of pain, and the way you feel about it, you're probably gonna still feel the same like I do 20 years later. But I haven't worked it out. I haven't worked it all the way out. It's just there.
Yeah, I mean, the skin darkening thing, like I definitely have used self-tanner. I quit doing that a couple years ago because it felt like wrong to me. But I remember the first time I ever used it was because of a show. To circle back to that, was doing West Side Story with my very mostly white community, because I was living up in Riverdale in the Bronx, which is a heavily Jewish neighborhood of New York. We moved a lot, so that wasn't really where I grew up, but that was at high school, where I lived during high school. And my white best friend, my blonde white best friend, her mom was a director and cast her as Maria, and had
damn it.
us all. Yeah. Oh, you want to talk about fucked up? Oh. And had us all wear self-tanner.
Oh
and
no! How old were you when this was again?
16.
Oh god.
So damaging. Like, I think you can laugh about it now, but I get angry thinking about that.
Yeah.
And like, people, for me anyway, I have changed a bit as I've grown up. Like my hair got darker. It used to be like really red when I was little, and now it's naturally like a darker brown. It looks like more of a, I don't know, like more, it's just without the red, it looks less white girl.
Yeah.
But I had so much of my identity was built up around being a redheaded Latina, that I put red highlights in because it makes me feel like myself again.
Oh, wow,
or like I used to only burn in the sun, but now I get darker. It's just I'm so pale you wouldn't notice.
Okay.
just like, oh, she's got kind of a yellow tint now. She's still pale.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that as you're getting older, you're changing more in a direction that does show off your Afro-Latina side. I mean, even like right now, I'm looking at the headshot that you have for your image, and you don't look like a white girl to me in that. You definitely look like, honestly, you look like you could be an amazing ass host to a Univision show, because you got like the big smile and you got that pose going. You definitely look more Latina in this picture than well, also, so that was something that happened when we first saw each other too, and this tends to happen whenever I get on with a new person. When I do the pre-screen, I always do the video, and I see your face right away, and I'm like, because you and I you're exchanging emails beforehand and you're like, yeah, I'm white passing and da-da-da, and I have all these issues about the whiteness. And then I see you and I'm like, hello, mixed girl, what are you talking about? And it happens to a lot of people that I end up talking to, especially it's happened more with the white passing folks, where I can, as a mixed race person who has, spidey sense about mixedness, I'm digging out all of the different things. And so that little bit of validation just from another mixed person just changes the course of the conversation.
It does. It's like a healing thing to hear. And I always wonder, I'm finding it fascinating that you're saying you get that more from the people who are white passing that you speak to, because that was kind of a theory I had, like a personal theory just based on my family, that it seems like of the three of us Vega-Romero siblings, I'm the person who spends the most time like actively thinking and talking about being mixed.
Because you're paler.
Yeah. But when I first heard your podcast and you responded to the post that I did about it, like back this summer when we dropped this and we started going back and forth and you asked me to be on the show, I was like, I reached out to my little sister and she and I have a kind of tempestuous relationship. We're just very different people, but we had like a really sincere conversation where I was like, I've been doing all of this, like soul searching around this. I have my ethnic group, and it means a lot to me to explore not just one side of the family or the other, but like what it means to be a mixed person in the world. And like, what do you think? Like, I feel like we've never talked about it. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't really think it's like what's the point in talking about it? We just are who we are. And then we were talking about other things. And like 10 minutes later, she comes back at me with, oh, I remember this. I do remember being a little kid and being in the bath, and I made up this song for Mom. And it was just singing about different people. And I went, I'm going to get this wrong. She was like, I was saying, I'm black, I'm white, but what am I? And she was talking about what is she? And I asked my mom later, I was like, Mom, do you remember this like little song? And she was like, oh yeah, she used to sing that all the time. I don't remember at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did she feel that because she presents, you said she presents the most Latina of you all, does she just blend fully and embrace the Latina side, or does she not address her mixes? Is that what her deal is?
She just doesn't, I don't think she really addresses it. Like, I don't want to speak on her behalf.
Yeah.
But she's also more, she considers herself more Jewish than I do, but she has 3 kids and their dad is Dominican, so her kids look very Latina.
The healing aspect of it is interesting because my brother and I have this too, in which he sort of embraced the white side and I've embraced the black side. I do make a joke, and I'll bleep out his name because I don't have his permission or whatever, but like I make a joke about the reason why I'm black is because my name is Sharmane Latrice, and the reason why he is white is because his name is and because he was named for my father, and my father is the half Brit, half black, half Brit, and they took their middle name is my British grandmother's last name, maiden name, so they have a white ass name, and he has the curly hair that he relaxes, and he tries not to be on the sun so he can stay pale, but he has darker skin than I do, but you did not detect blackness in him whatsoever. He looks more Mexican, I think, than you could say like looking black. And then in my case, I have black features, but I'm paler. I have straighter hair, although it's starting to curl up now that I'm getting older. But for your sister to look more Latina and embrace the Jewish side more, and you to be paler and embrace the Latin side more, and you're both probably sitting there going, I would swap with you look-wise, just so that I could feel like myself.
Well, I think my sister is like legit secretly the most beautiful woman on the planet, so I would always swap with her, but I thought that's we were little. Yeah, I know. It's just funny the way siblings are like that, and it's not that I don't like. I just did Birthright Israel this summer.
Okay.
And that was what was really cool about doing that trip was I did it with my friend Michelle, who is also half Cuban and half Jewish, but her Cuban side isn't black.
Oh.
So she's like half Latina and half white. But going on that trip with her was like, and he not just because we had that in common, we had that bond, but like when we were in Israel, there's like Israeli Cuba. That's like a popular vacation spot for them. There's like Cuban art museums everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but there was like, we went to an art museum and there was a whole display of Cuban artists, and it was like, what? And I just thought that was really, yeah.
So can I ask, because I think I know this, but because I'm not Jewish, I'm not 100% sure. You get to identify as ethnically Jewish through your mother's heritage and not your father's heritage. If you happen to have a Jewish father, you would still need a Jewish mother to be considered Jewish?
Depends on like which sect of Judaism you come from, but yes, like historically that's the case. It's a matrilineal culture that is still incredibly patriarchal, because like it's a monotheistic religion that has a male god. But that is like, yeah. So because my mother is Jewish, I will always be considered a Jew by Jewish people. I was raised like, pick your own religion. This is like your heritage. On both sides, we celebrated everything. But so when I was really little, my dad's mom was like our nanny. She lived with us and she took care of us, and both my parents worked. And she was Catholic. So she would take us to church. She would take us to mass, like in Spanish. And, but then my mom's family was like really present too. And, I really tried to be Jewish for most of my life. Like I got bat mitzvahed and everything. And then when I was in college, I had this like conversion experience and like went through catechism and everything and became Catholic. And then like, right around the time I started questioning my whole identity. So a couple of years ago, which is also the like Saturn returns period of your life, you know, when you're in your late 20s, I was like really questioning my belief system. And I've come to realize that I don't really believe in anything. But I really love the heritage and the culture, and celebrating the holidays is really important to me.
So that's interesting. You're an apostate from two religions.
Yeah.
Which I haven't met anybody who has said that before. That's interesting. I'm a lifelong atheist, but I was raised in the Baptist church and then the non-denominational church, but I never believed in God the entire time. And my husband is an apostate from like Protestant Christian. So he's an atheist now, but you can still see every now and then that indoctrination is there, and so it surfaces in really weird ways as an adult. That's very frustrating for him. So with you going through that transition 2 times, besides the holidays, what other kind of things back up on you in terms of your past religions?
I mean, back up in like it pops up in a negative way, or like
positive? I guess, I mean, either way, it could be positive or negative, but just weird moments in which you're just like, oh wait, but I don't believe in this stuff anymore, and it just happens to surface.
Oh yeah. So I took a couple of trips in the last 2 weeks for Thanksgiving, and on the plane I crossed myself when we were taking off and when we were landing. Like that, I had to do it, and I was like, this is so dumb, but and I'm gonna say, like, it's not that I don't believe that there's something out there, because I just don't think anyone's gotten it right. I can't think of I'm sure there are other things I do that are like super Jewish or super Catholic that don't make sense for me to do.
It's always one of those things that I'm curious about. I'm like, what is the weird thing that happened to you afterwards that kind of reminded you grew up this kind of way? You know, it's just a weird, and it doesn't have anything to do with militantly mixed, but since you mentioned the religion, I'm like, yeah, let's talk. Like, I'm curious about that kind of stuff.
Oh no, but I for me it does, because so much of my mixedness has to do with being from an interfaith household. Like, I think that's fascinating. That one thing stuck in your head. And
so that's actually interesting that you say it the way that you did. Like, you're a mixed faith household, you're mixed race, mixed culture, mixed national.
Yeah.
So we do have a lot in common in terms of like a lot of intersectionality is going on, but I don't necessarily consider myself with the religious intersectionality, but it's interesting that like your whole deal ends up, you start to realize like my whole thing is mixed. Like I have every aspect of my life has some sort of mixedness in it. So that's interesting that you also have the religion thing. We'll have to talk offline about about those stuff even more because I'm way fascinated into it. I'm completely distracted.
Sure.
That's cool. All right. Well, let's get back into some of the other things that you wanted to talk about mixedness.
Well, so the other thing that in that list of intersectionality is like the coming from two different cultures, like being, so I can't just say, oh, I'm like first generation because, you know, I'm the daughter of an immigrant, sure, but I'm also the daughter of a family that's been here for 5 generations now, I think.
Yeah.
And it's two very like perspectives on what it means to be American and like what it means to be mixed race too.
Do you have this idea of being like an American foreigner? This is an idea that I've described myself as because you come from both an immigrant family and a multi-generational American family that you feel like you're both own this place and don't at the same time.
Oh, yeah. There are some things that, like, I feel like I'm so American because of being the child of an immigrant. Like, that makes me, I feel more American. But then also sometimes I feel like I can step back from some cultural things and be like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, this things that are, like, just straight up American, it doesn't add up. I don't know if I would call myself an American, like a foreigner, but, and then that also specifically like my own specific upbringing, like we were encouraged to embrace, like I was bilingual until I was 7. And then around that time, my grandmother and my tia had to move to Miami because my grandmother was elderly and needed to somewhere warm and more comfortable. And when they left, my father decided that we weren't allowed to speak Spanish anymore.
Oh, weird. Did he explain why?
Being like, no, it was just, well, the explanation was, you're American, be American, you speak English. And because it was coming from him, you know, and I can understand a lot of Spanish. When I speak it, I have a good accent. Like I sound Cuban-ish. Okay. But my vocabulary is like really childlike.
Oh, really?
And no matter how muddy, it just doesn't progress. But then I'll dream sometimes in Spanish. And I've been writing a lot of poetry this year. I'm trying, that's another creative project that I'm trying to get off the ground is I want to publish a book of poetry. It's like this mashup of photographs and poems that I call Insta poems. And a lot of them are bilingual poems.
Oh, okay. That's awesome.
So then I'll look at I went to visit my cousin when I was in Florida for Thanksgiving, and she and her brother, they're trilingual because their parents are deaf. So they are fluent in English, ASL, and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just like endlessly jealous of that.
Yeah.
Like just because they can like sort of seamlessly travel between different communities that they are legitimately a part of all of them. Yeah. And it's like, you know, especially when my grandmother was still alive, it was like really painful for me that I couldn't have a conversation with her without somebody translating when she was like one of the most important people to me.
Yeah. How do you remember how fast it took for the Spanish to kind of slip away from you as after she left?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I don't think I've ever thought about that. My memory of that time is there are a lot of blank spaces.
You were pretty young too, so.
I was pretty young. It was like a really rough time for my family. So like I know a lot of blanks are just going to stay blank. Yeah. But I want to say I have multiple memories of being told not to speak Spanish, so it must have taken some time for me to desist. So I was kind of like a sassy, bratty child. Like I would climb out of my crib and like I liked to break the rules until around that age, and then I became a goody two-shoes.
I see.
It was like part and parcel of giving up Spanish, I guess. I don't know. I had something that I wanted to ask you about. Okay. Because this is something I've been thinking about a lot. So both of your parents are mixed. Yeah. And I'm kind of fascinated by that. I guess I'm like thinking about if I ever have kids one day, like what kind of identities they'll have based and like dependent on who I end up with. Was that being mixed part of your childhood, or you've talked about being like growing up feeling black?
Yeah, it really was. But so I feel like through the show, I've kind of discovered that my mixed race experience is somewhat unique from biracial people, not just because there's one race on each side, but because both of my families were very aware of their mixedness. So both of my grandmothers are foreign and both of my grandfathers are American GIs. And so my German, Irish, Appalachian, white grandfather country western singer, redhead, blue-eyed grandfather, went to Japan, where he was stationed during the Korean War, and him and his buddies married my grandmother and her sister. And so they were very much a part of the third wave, I believe, or the second wave of the Japanese war bride eras. So there's 3 waves of that. And they basically, when they came to the States, my grandmother had to take classes, assimilation classes through the military to become an American wife. She had to learn how to cook and clean the way Americans do. They were taught English. They were told not to use their language at home because it would confuse the kids, things like that. And then my dad's side, my Black American grandfather was stationed in England during that same period and married my Caucasian British grandmother. And they're like black hair, blue-eyed Brits because she was half Welsh and half English, and they descend from like Spanish pirates that had been captured during the Elizabeth I reign. And so that's why they're that's why they're darker skinned, or they're darker haired anyway. They're not dark skinned British. And so like my Nana stayed British. Like we had pictures of the Queen, basically in the way like Orthodox people have icons as you enter the house that you have to like kiss or whatever. Like we had the Queen, we curtsied to the Queen. And so there was things like culturally when my Nana lived with us, there was afternoon tea, and there was the process of like how to make a tea. So I'm very snobby about the kind of tea that I drink. I prefer loose leaf to bags. And every time I have to drink out of bag tea, I'm just like peasant tea. And, I have a whole thing. She would also kind of stab our fingers with forks if we didn't put our pinkies out, which is so ridiculous because it's not even like a legit British thing. It's more of a stereotypical like joke thing. But my Nana was the type that like really wanted us to be like upper echelon British, which we weren't. Like my great grandfather was a con artist who had like 12 different names. So, so it's weird to think that she was trying so hard to make us look like proper little Brits, even though we were American kids. So I even had like fork marks on my pinky as a kid because of how often. So now if you see me drink anything, my pinky goes up. It's just a reaction. So like I lived in a house with my black father and my white British grandmother. My white British grandmother had gollywogs. Are you familiar with those?
No.
They are the blackface dolls that were really popular in the Jim Crow era, and later on, even now in British culture, they still have a lot of gollywog. It's like basically a tar baby.
Oh my God.
Everything about it is offensive. She also had her whole kitchen was designed in like Aunt Jemima style dark-skinned black mammy things.
Was that like her attempt to...
I cannot tell, and because we don't talk anymore, I couldn't tell you if this was her way of embracing my grandfather's blackness or if her way of being like hella racist, but the kind of racist that fucks black guys, like because I don't know for sure because I've never talked to her directly, but a cousin of mine had mentioned to me that she had another black boyfriend before she married my grandfather. Oh, wow. So like when I lived on my dad's side, we were always in a black neighborhood or always surrounded by black folks, but then we had my British grandmother there for part of it. So I was immersed in the British culture during the stuff that we had when we were together, and then I was immersed around black culture in my neighborhoods and how I grew up when I grew up in Long Beach. And then when I was with my mom's side, even though my Japanese grandmother, who is my favorite person in the family, she was the one, that we weren't allowed to talk about being black because she didn't want her family to know that we were black. That part was the pain that I had to deal with, is like hiding my identity throughout my childhood. Yeah. And yet she's still my favorite family member. She wouldn't speak Japanese to us because the military had told her not to teach her kids. And so by the time I rolled around, she was still paranoid that the military would send her back to Japan if she taught us Japanese. So there's only little bits and pieces of Japanese that I got as a kid, some words that I knew in Japanese before I knew it in English, things like that. Words that I still struggle with, like left and right, I knew in Japanese before I knew in English, so it's always confusing to me in English, even at 40. Stuff like that.
Like a la derecha, like that. The directions will stick with you.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. And so like culturally at home, we did very Japanese things. We celebrated Japanese New Year, go to Japanese grocery store, we eat a lot of Japanese food. So I feel very Japanese, and then I go around Japanese people and suddenly I'm not Japanese anymore because Japanese people aren't mixed friendly. So, I would sit there and use my little Japanese like, watashi wa yonbonichi nihonjin desu, and telling people I'm a quarter Japanese, and they'll laugh and say okay, like it's cute that you think you're Japanese, but like no. So everywhere I went, we had access to all the different cultures, and the only thing that I really didn't get exposed to is my grandfather, my white grandfather, had left when I was still a toddler. So I remember him being a country western singer, and I remember hearing that twangy ass music on occasion and stuff like that, like things that I just really hate now, and I can't tell if I hate it because I don't associate myself with that white side, or if it's because it just sounds awful and it's stupid. But but like I really didn't hate it. So I never got to really know like the Irish, German, Appalachian type of thing. I just have a couple pictures that I've seen of what their life was like. So it's hard to identify as that, even though I put it in my list, because it still is what makes me up. I just don't know anything about it. So like that's why I have the hierarchy, is I spent most of my time around and in Black neighborhoods, and then the next amount of time I spent was with Japanese, and then the next amount of time I spent was with my British side. So those are like the core things. None of my family looked the same. Everybody was different colors and different shades, and all of my dad's brothers married people or had babies with people that were different races too. So I have Black and Mexican cousins or siblings. I have Black and Japanese and white cousins. I have Japanese and white cousins. I have light-skinned cousins and dark-skinned cousins, you know. So like I was always around mixed people. So awesome. I always felt normal at home. Then I started going to schools, and depending on which parent I lived with, I was either around Black kids or I was around white kids. And once I started being around white kids when I was older, like in high school, I was just like, y'all are weird. Like, you guys are different, you know, because it was so different to how I grew up. I was used, and also because my family was military, we were always around mixed people, because military people go to other countries and bring back, you know, yellow brides and, and that's, you know, or whatever. So like I had a bunch of mixed race friends growing up. So even as I was sitting there trying to be more Black, you know, having braids and wearing cross colors, because that was my time, it was early 90s, things like that, there was times when I wasn't Black enough. You know, mostly Black people embraced me, but every now and then I wasn't Black enough. And then I got around white kids, and I certainly wasn't white enough. I've never once ever been accepted as a white person, even though I'm half white. And so with them, it was just like I was always an other. I was this exotic other too, because I was small, you know, small framed like a Japanese, but I had a big old butt and big chest like my Black side of the family, and big lips and everything like that. So like I was a weird kind of exotic hot as a teenager, except for I didn't like anybody, so nobody knew, like nobody had access to me, and it was just weird to have that kind of, I didn't realize I was mixed until people started to identify, you got a Black girl butt, you got a yellow girl, you know, you got an Asian girl skin, like that kind of stuff as a teenager is what made me realize I was mixed. So my childhood was very mixed, and yet I didn't know that's what it was until people started pulling out, oh, you know, you have slanty eyes, you have a big old butt, you have, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I feel it's probably easier, I guess, for me to feel grounded in my mixedness because I was always surrounded by mixed people. But where I struggle is, you know, like I've talked to you about the darker skin issue that I had, is wishing that I was darker just to feel normal on occasion. Like I love being mixed. I absolutely love being mixed, but I can't help that insecurity that pops up on occasion about not being Black enough, or not being seen as Black when I want to be seen as Black.
Oh my gosh, so much of what you said it's like I don't even know where to start. So something that kind of popped out at me was what you were saying about having all of those cousins who were also mixed, and that's just like so cool, because for me growing up, we had both my dad and my mom are from like 2 sibling households. Like they each had 1 sibling, and their sibling didn't have kids. So my cousins, so any cousins I have are like second or third. They're like first cousin once removed, or second cousin. And on both sides of the family, they are not mixed. So like my white cousins are just white Jewish people, and my Cuban cousins are just Cubans. Like their parents married other Cubans, and like stayed in that immigrant community in Miami. That's like no longer really an immigrant community, but it's like it's literally called Little Havana.
Right. So that they've been here, but they still have accents, even though they've been here for multiple generations.
Yeah. And so when I looked at my cousins, I just saw like, oh, I don't fit in on either side. I saw that from a very early age, and I think that's interesting.
Some of the cousins that I was referring to were second cousins. So like my mom had me at 15, so her cousins are my age.
Oh wow.
Yeah, fair enough.
A lot of them are my age. And from my own mom's side of the family, I do have an aunt that has kids, but I didn't grow up around them because she had got disowned. And then my younger aunt didn't have kids. But my dad's side of the family, they had a bunch of kids. So there were times when I lived with my cousins or they lived with us. And that's why I did have that rich cousin life because we were very communal in the beginning. We're not now. We barely talk, but like our whole family barely talks. But when we were kids, we were together a lot. Yeah.
It's just interesting because there's we have a lot of things in common. I think with the this person was disowned.
Oh, really?
We don't talk to them anymore. That definitely happened on my dad's side of the family a lot.
So let me ask about that then, because it's big on Japanese side. Like you fuck around and you are gone, and we will never think about you again. But in the Latin X community, or maybe specifically the Cuban community, that's a thing of you betrayed the family and you're done?
Yeah, I think it's always more in my experience anyway. I see it because I feel like I can't legitimately say, oh, I have this authority on the Cuban experience or the Latinx experience. But I will say what I've observed, my family, more of a personal thing. So if your brother does something to you and you don't like it, he's dead to you and you won't talk for 20 years. And then one of you will break the ice for some reason, like maybe someone's sick.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that was really hard growing up to be suddenly cut off from who you love. And that definitely happened with my relationship with my father, that he's been in and out of my life because that's how he operates.
Okay.
He'll just disown you and not ever want to speak to you again, and then all of a sudden it's fine and you don't know why. And probably saying that is grounds for getting to again. But so that's something I struggle actually in integrating my mixed identity as well. And I get this pressure sometimes from my Jewish grandmother, I'll say. Sometimes I feel from her, she's maybe said it explicitly, that if that side of the family rejects you, why would you want to claim it? Why don't you just be Jewish?
Because the sore is there, the wound is there, and you want to feel whole.
Yeah.
But sometimes your family prevents you from being whole. Yeah, I understand that. Well, it's weird. So my mentality on this, it depends on who I'm talking about. With the Japanese side, because I was raised in a culture that will cut you off and then you're never back again. With that side, I'm fully fine never talking to people again. My mother and I had a falling out a couple summers ago. I don't think about her ever. It doesn't, and well, obviously parts of the mixed race story ends up popping up and I do tell stories about her, but I don't miss her or crave her in my life at all. Well, on my dad's side, I have memories and I miss how I remember things being, but because there's been so much drama and betrayal in the family, I'm applying my Japanese cut-offery to there, and so I don't the feelings don't back up on me. I don't mourn the loss anymore.
I mean, I'm jealous of that, honestly, of the ability to not have that pain.
Yeah, the only thing I can say though, you would definitely have to be raised that way, because my husband doesn't understand this concept of me. He's heard it for years, so he gets it. But we ran into my aunt, who I don't speak to anymore, at a Japanese event in San Francisco, and I saw her first, and I tried to steer my husband in a way where he wouldn't see her, because I knew he was going to try to get us to talk. And we hadn't talked in 10 years at this point, and then he noticed her, and he goes, "Everybody stop." And so my grandmother, my aunt, and I and my husband were just in a parking lot in San Francisco, all froze for a second. And then he's like, "You guys need to talk." And we did the cursory hi, I didn't want to make my grandmother uncomfortable because she knew that my aunt and I don't speak anymore. So I hugged her, and then my aunt hugged me, even though I was totally fine if we didn't hug because we don't talk anymore. And so I was like, okay, nice to see y'all, but we're meeting some people here, so have a nice day. And I'm ready to walk away because I was raised this way. And oddly enough, I was raised by that aunt to be this way. And so as we're walking away, I feel fine. I only feel bad for my grandmother that she had to be put in the position of that awkwardness. And then I talked to my grandmother a week or so later when she was with my mom, so it was easy for that to happen. But my husband was like, why didn't you take that opportunity to mend the fences? And I'm like, because that's not what we do.
Wow.
And I don't know, like, so I wouldn't even know how to tell people to feel that way. It was just like little weird lessons that you get from as young as you can be of like, that person wronged you, no second chances, bye. And I probably should have more feelings, but I don't. I get over people really quickly and I move on. The only person I would say that I have any kind of codependency or like it would be really hard to separate from would be my husband. We've been together for 18 years, almost 19 years. So like, which is weird because it's not like I hadn't been with my family for that long. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know. So there's a different level. Like with my husband, it would be very difficult, but with my family or with friends where things don't go right, I just cut it and it doesn't back up on me. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a positive, but I don't think of it as a negative. Does that make sense? Like if you...
Oh yeah, that makes... It's something that sounds kind of fucked up that like it maybe isn't, it's not for everyone and it's a very much a cultural...
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That would be how it
pass
is.
On to you. But since it works for you, why fight it?
Yeah. I get asked a bunch, like, don't you ever miss them? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes, but not in a way that makes me want to change my life. Like, I'm very much true to myself in all ways, and certain betrayals to go back into that kind of situation for me would cause me more harm, I think, than just whatever harm, quote unquote, that I would be experiencing by their absence right now. So like, I'm okay to ride this wave. But because I'm also multicultural and multinational too, I can see how on the flip side, if I'm flipping to the other side, you know, if I'm code switching emotionally, then it'd be like
code switching.
You know, it's like if I'm watching it in a movie, I'm just like, they should forgive each other. And yet I wasn't raised with the concept of forgiveness. So it's a weird thing in which like in my family, it has to be this way. Or with my friends or the people closest to me, it has to be this way. But for other people, I'd be like, oh, if you miss them, you need to go and mend that fence or whatever. Like I wouldn't even take my own advice in that in that way.
To me, what you said, like that forgiveness is not an option, or that's funny. That's making me think back about the Catholicism thing. That like I think like a big thing that drew me to Christianity for a while was the concept of like God is love and forgiveness, which is not well practiced. The Jewish God is also a God of love, but is also like more explicitly a God of vengeance. It's an older
Old Testament.
Exactly. And the concept of like loving the person, like loving your enemy and all of those things, I think I was really drawn to that because I grew up with a father who was unforgiving. And he's the one who was raised Catholic.
So bizarre.
Go for that one.
Yeah.
I just looked up and I saw this. I want to talk about the doll, your grandma's doll again, because
Oh, you looked it up?
No. I just like looked up out of the corner of my eye and saw on my shelf a doll that I have I think I told you this when we talked the first time, but I've been saying grandmother because I feel a little embarrassed about this. But when I was a little kid, I couldn't say abuela. So I called her Booba, and everyone called her Booba, my dad's mom. Well, she was a seamstress, and she made all sorts of crazy, like, cupcake dresses, you know, like, really frothy, lacy things for me and my sister, which I loved. But she also made us these dolls. I looked up, these dolls have brown skin. They're like brown fabric, but then the one that's in better shape has red yarn hair and like blue stitching for her eyes. It's like, this doll is like, I gotta send you a picture of her.
Yeah, please.
Like, of course I wanted to be darker, because that's like what I was raised with, like my Booba, and she, like the doll that I loved. Like, I'll send you also a picture of the older one who's like, you can see how well loved she is. Her dress is falling off, and I just think that's so fascinating. There's
Did you feel represented when you got to play with that doll?
Oh my God, when she made me a doll that had red yarn hair, I was like, the reason that doll is in perfect condition is because I treated it like we moved a lot, and that was always like the first thing on my shelf. And that doll like owned me. And when I figured out I was never going to be that dark, oh man.
Oh no.
It's funny.
So we've come to the end of our talk. Before we go, okay, before we go, two things. The first thing is I want to ask you, what do you love about being mixed?
Oh, I love that question so much. I love that I come from everywhere, and I feel like I have pretty deep connections to the places that my family's from. And I feel like it's, for me, being mixed is kind of like my artistic superpower. I thought it was like a hindrance for so long, but I'm starting to realize that so many of the things that make me an artist, that make me an actress and a singer and a writer, come from the experience of not looking like my family, not seeing families like mine in any of the entertainment I grew up with, come from being forced to code switch throughout my whole childhood, literally between languages, but also between modes of interaction, and just being forced to have empathy across the board and being able to look at people of all races and see like, oh, this person is connected to me, like that human connection that I think I don't think it gets taught in the same way to a monoracial child. So yeah, that crazy empathy.
All right. And before we go, is there any parting words that you want to say to the audience?
I feel like we covered pretty much everything because we talked for so long and it was
we talked for a long time.
I hope everyone enjoys it. But I want to share my mission statement for life. I really hope that this conversation and the work that I do empower other mixed race people, specifically girls, to see that there's a place for them in the arts. And to use their voices. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being on with me and talking to me for hours. I think we did this the last time too.
Oh, we so did. I'm very happy.
Yeah. So anytime, please come back. We have like 14 other more topics that we want to cover with each other. So just feel free to always come back. And
thank you.
Soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.